Ethan had never been very good with feelings. He knew that much about himself. He could recite every star in the Orion constellation and explain the science behind wormholes, but when it came to talking to people he cared about, especially girls, he froze. And now, he was stuck in a nightmare scenario he hadn't even imagined. Her name was Leela. She was like a living sunrise, bright, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. He had met her at the Academy's annual summer festival. She laughed at his awkward joke, and something inside him had flipped. Since then, he found every excuse to avoid eye contact, to escape casual conversations, and to dodge the moments when she might notice him in the hall. It wasn't that he disliked her. He liked her far too much, but liking someone like Leela was dangerous. She wasn't just the crown jewel of her family. She was literally the daughter of Queen Seraphina, the ruler of their planet's central kingdom. And Ethan was, well, he was just a nobody with a knack for tech and a reputation for being awkward. For weeks, he had avoided her with near-supernatural dedication. He changed his schedule, skipped cafeteria breaks, and even pretended to be sick once just to avoid a casual brush in the corridor. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. One afternoon, as he ducked behind a row of hovering cargo pods in the Academy's courtyard, he heard a voice that made his chest freeze. "Ethan Aldridge." He froze completely. It was Leela. It was deeper, colder, and impossible to ignore. He turned slowly, half expecting the shadows to swallow him whole. There, standing with an elegance that made the air itself seem lighter, was Queen Seraphina. Her presence was magnetic, terrifying, and regal all at once. She wore a ceremonial cloak that shimmered with tiny embedded lights, her eyes the pale, sharp gray of storm clouds ready to break. She didn't smile, but her gaze pierced him straight through. "Yes, Your Majesty," he stammered, trying to stand straight and failing miserably. His voice sounded small even to him. "You've been avoiding my daughter," she said simply, almost accusingly. Not a question, not a suggestion, an observation that felt heavier than a mountain. Ethan's throat went dry. He wanted to explain. He wanted to say it wasn't personal, that he just couldn't deal with the attention, with the pressure. But the words caught in his mouth like iron chains. Queen Seraphina didn't wait for excuses. "I want to see you in private," she said, her voice calm but absolute. "Now." Ethan followed silently, his mind a whirlwind of panic. He kept thinking, this is it. I'm about to be reprimanded in front of the entire court. I'm going to be humiliated beyond repair. But the Queen led him through hidden passages he didn't even know existed, away from the Academy grounds and into a private chamber that felt both cold and impossibly vast. Inside, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of energy panels along the walls. Sunlight filtered through translucent crystal windows, casting rainbows across polished floors. Queen Seraphina turned to him fully, and this time she spoke in a tone that was almost human. "I don't care about your status, Ethan," she said. "I care about your character. My daughter, she notices people differently. She notices hearts. And I have seen yours. Hiding from her will not protect you. It only makes things worse." Ethan swallowed hard. He felt like the air itself had turned sticky around him. "She knows," he thought. "She can see right through me." "Your Majesty, he started, but she held up a hand, gentle yet commanding. "Sit," she instructed. He obeyed, though the floor felt far away beneath his feet. "You are human, and humans are complicated. You think avoiding something will erase it. You think fear protects you. But courage, Ethan, courage is different. Courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. Courage means facing it anyway." Her words echoed in his chest. They weren't threats. They weren't instructions. They were truths. The kind of truths that demanded he feel and that made him realize how deeply he had buried himself under avoidance and excuses. "You've spent weeks running from something that could have been beautiful," she continued, her voice softening just slightly. "And yet here you are, face to face. That counts for something. Now tell me, why are you afraid?" Ethan's hands trembled. He had never admitted this to anyone, not even in the privacy of his own room. But the Queen's eyes were unyielding yet not cruel. They were expecting honesty. And so he said it, voice low and shaky, almost like a confession. I don't belong in her world. She deserves someone brave, someone amazing, not me." Queen Seraphina studied him in silence for what felt like hours, though the room's clocks didn't move at all. Then she smiled. Not a polite smile, not a regal smile, a real, knowing, slightly amused smile. "Perhaps the world isn't ready to decide who belongs where," she said quietly, "but I am. And I think you might belong more than you realize, but this," she gestured between them, "cannot remain hidden. You will face her, and whatever happens, Ethan, you must not hide." For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of possibility pressing on him in a way that was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He nodded, though words failed him, and Queen Seraphina's gaze softened as she led him back toward the door. The courtyard looked the same as before, but Ethan felt different. He could still hear Leela's laughter echoing somewhere in the distance, but now it was no longer a sound to fear. It was a challenge. And he wasn't sure he was ready. But maybe, just maybe, he could be. The moment Ethan stepped back into the academy courtyard, the air felt sharper, as if every breath carried the weight of what he had just endured. Queen Seraphina's words repeated themselves in his mind. You must not hide. Simple, yet impossible. He had spent weeks hiding, and now he was being told the opposite, told to face something he didn't even know he deserved. Leela appeared suddenly, rounding a corner with her usual effortless grace. Her hair glinted like molten gold in the late afternoon sun, and her eyes were bright with curiosity. She froze for a moment when she saw him, tilting her head as if trying to figure out what had changed. Ethan's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide behind walls of excuses again. But this time, something inside him refused. "Ethan," she asked softly, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. He swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. "Hey, Leela," he managed, voice cracking slightly. He felt exposed, but for the first time he didn't care. She smiled a small, almost shy smile. "You look different. Are you okay?" Ethan blinked. She didn't laugh, didn't tease. She genuinely wanted to know. It startled him, but it also gave him courage. He shifted his weight and tried to appear steadier than he felt. "Yeah, I'm okay. I just needed to think." Leela's brow furrowed slightly, sensing the tension he couldn't hide. "Think about what?" she asked gently, taking a step closer. I realized something," Ethan said, words slow but deliberate. "I've been running from you, from how I feel, from everything. I was scared, okay? Scared that I wasn't enough, that you deserved someone better." Her expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. She waited, and Ethan continued, each word peeling off the layers he had carefully built over weeks. "You're amazing, Leela, and me, I'm just me. I thought if I avoided you, I could protect myself from disappointment, from failure, from hurting someone I care about." There was a long silence, and Ethan felt the world shrink around him. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure she could hear it. He opened his mouth to say more, but words failed. He had said too much already, and yet nothing had landed. Then unexpectedly she reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his. The contact sent a jolt through him, not painful but electric. Her eyes held his, steady and warm, without judgment. "Ethan, you don't have to protect me," she said softly. "I'm not fragile. I'm not some prize to be won. And I've noticed you a lot more than you think." His stomach dropped. The air seemed heavier, denser, charged with the honesty between them. He had never imagined she would say something like this, never imagined she could see him the way he wanted to be seen. And yet she did. Before he could speak, a shadow moved across the courtyard. Ethan looked up and froze. A small delegation of royal guards was approaching. They didn't look hostile, but their presence was enough to remind him that Leela's world was not his. Her laughter, her light, her ease, these were luxuries he might never fully belong to. But then Leela stepped forward, standing in front of him, and for the first time Ethan felt a strange sense of protection, not from force, but from her resolve. "Ignore them," she said, voice firm. "I'm talking to him." Ethan's heart soared and sank simultaneously. The audacity, the boldness, it thrilled him, but it also terrified him. "This is impossible," he thought. "She's a princess. She could have anyone. Why is she even standing here with me?" I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I've messed up so much already. I've avoided you, made things awkward." She shook her head slowly, smiling in a way that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Ethan, life isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about facing them. You've got courage even if you don't realize it. That's why I like you. That's why I noticed you." The words struck him harder than he expected. He felt a rush of relief, terror, and exhilaration all at once. He realized that for the first time, hiding was no longer an option, but neither was running. He had to face Leela, face the chaos of his feelings, and face the world that seemed so much larger than him. And just when he thought he might finally speak, Queen Seraphina appeared silently at the edge of the courtyard, her eyes sharp but her lips curved in approval. Ethan froze, but she only gave him a subtle nod, a silent encouragement. Not a command, not a threat, just an acknowledgement that he had the choice to rise to the moment. Ethan's gaze returned to Leela. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside him. "Then, let's not hide anymore," he said quietly, but with newfound determination. Leela's smile widened, a mixture of relief and something deeper, something promising. "Good," she said simply, and for the first time Ethan felt like he wasn't just existing in her light, he was part of it. But as their hands brushed together again, he felt the weight of the world pressing in. This wasn't just about them anymore. There were rules, expectations, and consequences he hadn't yet imagined. And deep down, Ethan knew the real challenges were only beginning. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The courtyard, the sunlight, Leela's hand brushing against his. It all felt surreal. But reality, as it often did, demanded attention in the form of duty and consequence. The royal guards lingered at the edges of the courtyard, silent but watchful, reminding him that Leela's world was one of rules he didn't fully understand. And for the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about feelings. It was about survival in a world where one wrong move could shatter everything. As he walked beside Leela toward the Academy's main hall, he noticed how natural she seemed, laughing softly at something a friend had whispered, completely unaware of the storm inside him. He wanted to reach out, to hold her hand again, but the fear of drawing unwanted attention stopped him. She noticed his hesitation and gave him a small, reassuring smile. It was enough to steady him, but only just. "Ethan," she said quietly, leaning slightly toward him as they moved, "you can't let fear run your life, not here, not with me." "I know," he whispered, though in truth, he wasn't entirely convinced. "But it's not just fear, it's everything. Your world, my world, it's so different." Her expression softened, but her eyes sharpened. "Difference doesn't mean impossible. It just means we have to work harder. If we want this to matter, we have to face it together." Her words were a spark, igniting something in him he hadn't felt before, hope. For the first time in weeks, Ethan imagined a future where he didn't hide. A future where Leela's light wasn't something he chased from the shadows, but something he could step into. Their conversation was cut short when the Academy's intercom crackled to life. A stern voice announced an unexpected assembly, requiring all students to gather in the central auditorium immediately. Ethan felt his stomach twist. These assemblies were usually ceremonial, sometimes political, and always uncomfortable for someone like him, someone who preferred to stay invisible. Leela squeezed his hand lightly. "Come on, we'll face it together," she said. Ethan nodded, though his nerves screamed otherwise. As they entered the auditorium, the entire student body was already seated, eyes forward, waiting. At the front stood the principal, flanked by two royal advisors. And then Leela's mother appeared, Queen Seraphina. She was more imposing in the large hall, her presence radiating authority that demanded attention from every corner. Ethan felt a cold wave of panic. He had faced her privately before, but now, in front of hundreds of students, the situation was entirely different. What if she called him out? What if she humiliated him? His palms grew sweaty and he shifted nervously. Leela noticed and whispered, "Stay with me. You're not alone." The assembly began, but the Queen's gaze found him immediately. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. Ethan felt exposed, like he was being measured and judged with every second. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on Leela's presence beside him. Then, unexpectedly, Queen Seraphina spoke, not to the assembly but directly to him. "Ethan Aldridge," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Step forward." Every head in the auditorium turned toward him. Heat rushed to his face. His legs felt heavy, like walking on thick syrup. He looked at Leela, who gave him a small nod, her expression calm but firm, and took a deep breath. He had no choice. He stepped forward. The hall went silent. Ethan's heart raced as he approached the Queen. He expected criticism, a reprimand, or even ridicule, but Queen Seraphina's eyes were calm, almost approving. "You have shown honesty and courage," she said. "Most would flee from their fears. You faced yours, but courage alone is not enough. You must act with wisdom, integrity, and respect for those around you." Ethan's mind raced. Wisdom? Integrity? He had never thought of himself as wise or particularly brave. But her words felt like a lifeline, anchoring him in a storm he didn't fully understand. Then she turned her gaze toward the assembly. "Everyone here must understand," she continued, "that true strength is not in titles or power, it is in character, and Ethan Aldridge exemplifies this lesson." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ethan froze, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. Leela's hand found his again, squeezing gently, grounding him. "You have a choice," Queen Seraphina said, her voice softening as she looked at him. "To hide or to rise. Choose wisely, Ethan. Your next actions will define not just your future, but the trust placed in you by those who believe in you, including my daughter." Ethan swallowed hard. The entire assembly seemed to hold its breath. He realized in that moment that hiding was no longer an option. Every glance, every action, every word from now on would matter. And for the first time, the weight of responsibility didn't feel entirely oppressive. It felt like a challenge he might just be ready to meet. As he returned to his seat beside Leela, he caught her eye and saw something he hadn't seen before: pride. Quiet, unwavering pride. And it made his heart swell, not with fear, but with determination. This wasn't the end of his struggle, not by far, but for the first time, Ethan knew he had the courage to face it. The days after the assembly were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The academy felt smaller somehow, as if every hallway, every corridor, and every classroom was suddenly magnified with expectation. Students who had barely noticed him before now looked at him differently. Some with curiosity, some with skepticism, and a few with quiet envy. Ethan didn't know how to handle it. He had always preferred to blend into the background, yet now the world seemed to insist he step forward, whether he was ready or not. Leela, however, remained his constant. She walked beside him between classes, her presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. Every time she smiled, Ethan felt as if he were staring into the sun, dazzling and impossible to look away from, yet warm enough to melt the walls he had built around himself. Still, even with her by his side, the Queen's words echoed in his mind: "Every choice matters. You cannot hide." He was beginning to realize that facing Leela was only the beginning. The real challenge was facing the world that came with her, the politics, the expectations, and the constant judgment of those who believed the Crown's family deserved perfection in every interaction. The Academy's next assignment made this abundantly clear. Students were tasked with a public demonstration of leadership and creativity in front of the Royal Council, a high-pressure test that decided future privileges and recognition. Ethan had been paired with a team, but he quickly realized that Leela's influence made him a target. Some classmates whispered that he was only there because of her, that he didn't belong in the spotlight. Ethan felt a familiar wave of fear, the old instinct to retreat. He wanted to hide, to let someone else take the lead, but every time he looked at Leela, he remembered the Queen's warning. Courage means facing it anyway. On the day of the demonstration, the tension in the Grand Hall was suffocating. The council sat high above, observing every movement. Ethan's team struggled initially, disorganized and hesitant, and whispers of doubt spread through the audience. His palms were sweaty, and he felt the weight of every eye on him. For a moment, he thought he might fail spectacularly. Then Leela leaned toward him, her voice low but firm. "You can do this. I believe in you, not because you're with me, but because you're capable." The words struck deeper than he expected. He had spent so long doubting himself, thinking he was insignificant, thinking he didn't belong. But her belief was different. It wasn't tied to status, appearances, or expectations. It was about him, and that gave him a strength he hadn't known existed. He straightened, inhaled deeply, and stepped forward. "We can do this," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. His team turned to him, uncertain but willing to follow his lead. Ethan realized that leadership wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about presence, conviction, and the courage to act when fear screamed to do nothing. The demonstration began, and for the first time, Ethan felt a rhythm, a flow that carried him forward. He directed, organized, and inspired, each small victory boosting his confidence. The whispers of doubt faded, replaced by murmurs of admiration. Even the royal council leaned forward, intrigued by his composure and initiative. At the end of the demonstration, the hall erupted in applause. Ethan's chest heaved, not from relief alone, but from the realization that he had faced something enormous and survived. Leela clapped beside him, her eyes shining with pride, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like an outsider in her world. He felt seen. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. Queen Seraphina approached immediately afterward, her expression unreadable. Ethan's heart sank, expecting reprimand, criticism, or a reminder that he still didn't belong. Instead, she spoke softly but with unmistakable authority. "You have potential, Ethan," she said. "But potential without growth is meaningless. You must continue to challenge yourself, to face discomfort, and to embrace the responsibility of your actions. Leela can guide you, but she cannot fight your battles for you. You must decide who you want to be." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This was no longer about avoidance or fear. It was about choice, courage, and the willingness to step into a world that had seemed impossible. Later, as he walked with Leela under the fading light of the evening sky, he felt something shift within him. The fear that had haunted him for weeks was still there, but it was tempered by a growing sense of strength. He wasn't sure where this path would lead or what challenges awaited him next, but for the first time, he felt capable of facing them. Leela squeezed his hand again. "You're really changing, you know," she said, her tone teasing but affectionate. Ethan smiled, a little awkwardly but sincerely. Maybe I just needed someone to make me stop running." Her eyes softened. "And now that you've stopped, we'll see where it takes us." For the first time in his life, Ethan felt that he wasn't running from fear, responsibility, or love. He was running toward something greater, a future he could shape, a life he could claim, and a connection he could finally embrace without hiding. But deep down, he knew the real test wasn't over. Not yet. And whatever challenges lay ahead, Ethan had a choice: remain afraid or rise. And for the first time, he felt certain he would rise. Ethan thought the academy days would settle into some kind of rhythm after the demonstration, but he was wrong. Reality, it seemed, had a way of testing courage not once, but again and again. That evening, while walking back to his quarters, he noticed shadows moving in ways that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he realized the whispers weren't echoes. They were deliberate, aimed at him. A group of upperclassmen, some he had barely noticed before, blocked his path. Their expressions were smug, amused, almost predatory. "So you're the famous Ethan Aldridge," one sneered, circling him like a predator testing its prey. "The one the princess likes, the hero of the council demonstration, not bad for a nobody." Ethan froze. Fear rose like a tide, and for a moment the old instinct to run surged within him. But then he thought of Leela, of the Queen's words, and the demonstration where he had faced doubt and emerged stronger. He straightened his back. "I'm not interested in your opinion," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The upperclassman laughed, sharp and cruel. "You think words will save you? You're out of your depth, Aldridge. Maybe you should stick to hiding behind the princess." Before Ethan could respond, a voice rang out behind him, clear, confident, and unwavering. "Leave him alone." He turned to see Leela stepping forward, her eyes blazing with quiet fury. The upperclassman faltered. There was something about her presence, something that demanded attention and respect. "He doesn't need your approval," she said. "And if you care so much about status, maybe you should focus on your own lives instead of trying to step on others." The leader sneered but said nothing, exchanging glances with the others. They muttered insults under their breath and retreated, leaving Ethan shaken but alive. "You okay?" Leela asked softly, reaching for his hand. Ethan nodded, though his heart was still racing. "Yeah, thanks to you." She smiled, but the relief in her eyes was tinged with concern. "You can't face everything alone," she said. "Even courage has limits." That night, Ethan lay in his room, unable to sleep. The confrontation with the upperclassmen replayed in his mind. Fear was still there, shadowing him like a second skin, but he noticed something new. He hadn't run. He had stood, and Leela had stood with him. Together, they had faced something that could have crushed him alone and survived. The next morning brought a different kind of challenge. A royal envoy arrived, unexpected and formal, bearing a message from Queen Seraphina herself. Ethan was summoned to the palace, not just for another private meeting, but for something far more serious, a test of judgment and loyalty. Walking through the palace corridors, Ethan felt the weight of history pressing on him. Every painting, every tapestry, every polished stone seemed to whisper of generations of rulers, of decisions that had shaped the lives of thousands. And now, he was stepping into a space that had always seemed untouchable, a world that had been so far from him he had once thought it unreachable. Queen Seraphina was waiting, as always, composed and commanding. But today, there was a different intensity in her eyes. She gestured for him to sit. "Ethan," she said, voice calm but heavy with expectation. "The world beyond this academy is not as simple as a demonstration or a challenge from classmates. Power, influence, and loyalty are tested in ways that are invisible and often painful. You have shown courage, but now you must show discernment. There are those who would seek to manipulate Leela, and through her, the future of our kingdom. You must prove that you can act wisely without fear and without impulse." Ethan felt the enormity of her words pressing on him. This was no longer about avoiding feelings or facing fear. This was about understanding consequences, protecting what mattered, and acting with a maturity that felt far beyond his years. I understand, Your Majesty," he said, voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "Good," she replied, her gaze softening just slightly. "You will not be tested alone. Leela will guide you, but she cannot fight battles for you. That is your responsibility. Fail, and the consequences will ripple far beyond you." As he left the palace, the weight of responsibility clung to him. Leela waited outside, her expression unreadable. Ethan reached for her hand instinctively. I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted quietly. She squeezed his hand gently. "Then learn," she said. "Step by step, we'll face it together, but you have to take the first step yourself." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear, determination, and hope. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and demanding, but for the first time he didn't feel powerless. He had courage. He had Leela. And maybe, just maybe, he could rise to meet the challenges that had once seemed impossible. As the sun dipped behind the palace towers, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. The tests ahead would not be simple. They would challenge every part of him, his mind, his heart, his resolve, and yet, for the first time, he felt ready to face them. The morning air was crisp, but it carried an unusual weight. Ethan felt it as soon as he stepped onto the academy grounds. A subtle tension, a quiet unease that made the usual sounds of students and hovering carts feel distant, hollow. Something was off. He couldn't explain it, but his instincts, honed over weeks of navigating fear and uncertainty, whispered that today would not be ordinary. He found Leela near the training gardens, her usual calm presence tempered by concern. "Something happening," she said, her voice low, eyes scanning the horizon. "I can feel it. We need to be ready." Ethan nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He had faced fear before, from upperclassmen to public scrutiny, and survived. But this felt different. It wasn't just about courage or confidence. It was about trust, and he already sensed that trust would be tested today. They walked together through the academy's central courtyard, but their path was blocked by a small group of students whispering and glancing at them furtively. One of them, a senior named Kale, stepped forward, a sly smile twisting his face. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "I hear you've been getting special attention from the princess. Lucky, aren't you?" Ethan's stomach tightened. Kale had always been competitive, but now there was something sharper in his tone, something that hinted at more than rivalry. "I don't know what you mean," Ethan said cautiously. Kale laughed softly, but it carried a dangerous edge. "Oh, I think you do. But you see, some of us don't like outsiders stealing the spotlight. I'm sure the Queen would agree." Before Ethan could respond, Kale's words were cut off by the sharp tone of an intercom. The academy bells rang urgently, an emergency alert that froze every student in place. Queen Seraphina's voice echoed through the corridors. "All students are to remain in their quarters. Security teams are deployed." Ethan Aldridge, report to the council chambers immediately. Ethan's heart leapt into his throat. The summons was unusual, far more serious than any previous calls. Leela grabbed his hand. "Whatever it is, we face it together," she said firmly. The council chambers were vast, darker than the usual ceremonial rooms, lit only by soft panels along the walls. Ethan stepped inside, and his eyes immediately found the queen and a handful of advisors. But one figure stood out, Kale, flanked by two other students, and unusually silent, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," Queen Seraphina began, her tone calm but cutting through the tension, "you have been brought here for a matter of trust and judgment. A message has reached the council suggesting that someone is attempting to undermine the Academy's leadership and manipulate Leela for personal gain. Evidence points to interference within student ranks." Ethan's pulse quickened. He realized immediately where the suspicion might fall, but he also knew the truth. Kale had been planting subtle rumors, sowing doubt, and trying to make Ethan look unworthy. "You're aware," the Queen continued, "that manipulation, if left unchecked, can have consequences far beyond these walls. We must determine who acts in good faith and who seeks to exploit trust. This is not a challenge of strength, Ethan. It is a test of judgment, perception, and courage." Ethan swallowed hard. He felt a wave of panic. This was more than public scrutiny, this was accusation, and the stakes were higher than ever. One wrong word could ruin everything he had fought for, the respect he had earned, Leela's trust, and even his own sense of self. He glanced at Kale, whose expression was unreadable but clearly taunting. Then he looked at Leela. Her gaze was unwavering, steady, and calm, and for the first time, Ethan understood that courage was not just about standing up to danger. It was about standing up for truth, even when it could cost everything. "I know who's behind this," Ethan said, voice strong despite the fear coiling in his chest. "It's Kale. He's been spreading lies, trying to make me look unworthy, trying to manipulate the situation for his own gain." The chamber fell silent. Kale's face twisted, but Ethan didn't falter. "I don't want this to be about revenge," he added quickly. "I just want the truth to matter. I won't let deception harm those who trust me." Queen Seraphina studied him for a long, tense moment. Then she nodded, her approval subtle but unmistakable. "Truth spoken with courage is more valuable than power wielded through deceit," she said softly. "Ethan, your choice to speak up has preserved integrity, protected trust, and reinforced the lesson I wish to teach all who serve this academy." Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. The chamber felt brighter, as if the acknowledgement of truth had cleared the shadows. Leela stepped forward, her hand brushing against his. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. For the first time, Ethan realized that courage was not just about confronting fear, but about choosing to act rightly when the world pressed against him. And as Kale was escorted away under the Queen's watchful eyes, Ethan felt a quiet pride swell inside him, not for defeating Kale, but for standing firm when it truly mattered. The test was not over. He knew more challenges awaited, but for the first time, Ethan understood the meaning of courage, trust, and loyalty. And with Leela by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed Kale's exposure were strange for Ethan. The whispers and sneers had faded, replaced by cautious respect, but the weight of responsibility remained. The academy no longer felt like a simple place to learn. It had become a proving ground for courage, trust, and heart. Every glance, every word, every decision carried consequence. Yet with Leela beside him, Ethan felt something he had never known before, belonging. One evening, the Academy's observatory opened for a rare celestial event. The twin moons would align perfectly, a sight that occurred only once every 10 years. Ethan found himself wandering the observation deck, lost in thought, when Leela appeared, her figure outlined by the soft glow of the moons. "You came," she said simply. Her voice carried warmth, calmness, and something else, hope. "I wasn't sure I should," he admitted, his voice quiet. "There's been so much lately, I don't want to mess this up." Leela shook her head, her hair brushing his shoulder. "You've done more than you know. You've faced fear, stood for truth, and protected trust. That's more than most could manage." Ethan swallowed, feeling the lump in his throat. I still feel small, like I'm not ready for all this, for you, for your world. Her hand found his, and this time there was no hesitation. Ethan, being ready isn't about perfection, it's about courage, about stepping forward even when you're afraid. And you've done that every step of the way. The twin moons rose higher, bathing them in silver light. Ethan felt an overwhelming mix of emotions, fear, pride, hope, and love, all intertwining in a way that made his chest ache. He realized that the path he had feared, the world he thought was too vast, wasn't something to escape from. It was something to step into hand in hand with someone who believed in him. I don't know what comes next, he whispered. Neither do I, Leela admitted, smiling softly. But we can face it together, that's what matters. Ethan took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to look at her fully, without fear, without doubt. Then, I want to try, with you. I want to stop running from you, from life, from everything I've been afraid of. Leela's eyes shimmered with quiet joy. You already are trying, she said. You've never stopped, Ethan, even when it scared you. They stood together, silent, watching the moons align perfectly. In that moment, Ethan understood something profound. Courage wasn't about heroic acts or grand speeches. Courage was quiet. Courage was choosing to be honest with oneself and with others. Courage was accepting fear and stepping forward anyway. The following morning, Ethan received a summons from Queen Seraphina. His heart sank momentarily, remembering the seriousness of past encounters. But when he entered the palace, the queen's expression was different, soft, approving, almost proud. You have grown, Ethan, she said, her voice gentle but commanding. Not just in courage, but in wisdom. You have faced fear, deception, and doubt, and you have acted with integrity. That is what makes a true partner, not just for my daughter, but for life itself. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had worried for so long about being inadequate, about not belonging. But the Queen's words were confirmation that courage, honesty, and heart mattered more than status or expectation. When he returned to Leela, she was waiting in the palace gardens, her smile radiant. Well, she asked playfully. I think we might just survive this world, he said, laughing softly. It was the first laugh in weeks that felt entirely his own. Leela laughed too, the sound bright and free, and Ethan realized that surviving wasn't the goal. It was living fully, with courage and with someone who made life brighter, more meaningful, and worth every risk. As they walked through the gardens hand in hand, Ethan felt the fear that had once consumed him fade. There would always be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But now he had a foundation he could rely on: courage, honesty, and love. Looking up at the sky, the twin moons still shining brilliantly, Ethan realized that hiding had been a choice, but so had facing. And choosing to face it, all of it, fear and hope intertwined, was the moment his life had truly begun. He squeezed Leela's hand gently. No more running, he said, voice steady. No more running, she echoed, smiling. And together, beneath the twin moons, they stepped into a future neither of them fully knew, but both were ready to face, side by side, fearless and finally free.